Okay, so the main topic is making mistakes. And what we're looking at is the role of feedback in your loop for optimizing your cognition process. And that happens in the context of social learning, as well as in the context of like what we would consider traditional academic learning, because even that has social subtext and social elements. So the core thing is that your ability to learn from mistakes depends on your self-esteem, and to a certain extent, the way that your mindset affects the way that you calculate your self-esteem. If you have what's called a fixed mindset, and Carol Dweck wrote about this extensively, then essentially the whole time, hey Joe, hey Terrence, how y'all doing? So the whole time, with a fixed mindset, the whole time you're running, you're defending ego. You're defending this identity against a role that you learned from the culture that you sucked up from the environment. So the whole time you have this role that you imagine that you're playing, and anything that gets negative feedback from your surrounding people based off the role that you've adopted leads to like a cortisol spike. It leads to hey Roy, how's it going? Hey Joe. So it leads to this cortisol spike. So that's one of the two mechanisms of control. Obviously, when you absorb this role, you take on this role, and based off what you've absorbed over the course of your lifetime as to what it means to do well in that role, you absorb, you suck up all this implicit learning, you suck up all these ways of thinking, and they essentially become your cognitive prison. They become this status ladder that you climb, becoming better and better at, and the whole time narrowing your field of consciousness, narrowing your ability to see other perspectives, depending on what they call entativity, how the amount of cohesion in the group, in the identity group, that in the role that you've absorbed. Entativity is connected to how hard they work you along the way. Essentially, the more tightly the group opinion is moderated, the harder they work you, the more the fear-based conditioning is used, the higher the entativity of the group. So obviously this applies to medical training, because we were fight flight mode most of the time when we weren't sleep deprived, exhausted, following a set of pretty archaic rules without asking questions. But essentially, your ability to learn from mistakes and actually grow forward is based on your self-esteem, your ability to tolerate the feedback. Hey, Roy. Hey, Chris. Hey, Dr. Vogelman. So, again, this is in a fixed mindset, you're not able to tolerate that feedback because you're trapped in that particular role that you've adopted, and the calculations that go with that. Therefore, at no point in there are you going to go towards intrinsic motivation, listening to the aspects of your personality that would lead you to explore things and stuff like that. That's just not how your brain's going to work. So as you move to a growth mindset, what happens is then you develop a curiosity, because then you hear feedback differently. In a growth mindset, you don't get that cortisol spike that shuts down your prefrontal cortex. So you're not all amygdala. You're not in fight, flight, freeze, faint mode. So what you do in growth mindset is you become curious about the holes in your knowledge. Because basically there's a bunch of concepts you don't know. So when you come across a concept that you don't know, you become curious about it. And even further, when you come across a concept that you do know, as expressed from a different perspective, then you're fascinated by it, because then what your subconscious mind does is it has a pleasure called the pleasure of symmetry, because it's a Bayesian inference machine for the geeks out there. So your conscious mind is constantly looking for, based off your belief system, your prior exposure. Hey, Dr. Lowe. Hey, Jay. So based off your prior exposure, it's a Bayesian inference system. So in a fixed mindset, that Bayesian inference system is constantly being bathed in cortisol. A lot of the data shows that early life stress results in what's called the default mode network being configured to an external locus of control. So I know that was a little geekerish, but I think everyone who is on here, from the looks of it, could probably explain it as well as I could if they thought about it. So basically, with a growth mindset, you develop this curiosity, and you're looking for the feedback, because when new information comes in, you are driven by the search for that symmetry. You're open to serendipity, and there's an optimism. You live in a towards mindset, towards frame. You go towards the challenges, towards the information, as opposed to the away frame, where you're in fear-based. You're always looking to get away from something, and as such, you're not very much exploring the process. You're looking for it's called sign tracking in mice in scarcity environments, as opposed to goal tracking. Lots of deep info on that and addiction, by the way, but that's a rabbit hole. that's a trickle in my stream of consciousness, to maintain the metaphor from the writing above. So where was I with that? With the growth mindset, essentially, you go looking for these symmetries. And so when you see new knowledge, it's not threatening, it's fascinating, because the second you can see the metaphor from the perspective of the other person, essentially, you're able to, once you identify with them, you're able to absorb this volume of implicit information that's basically mimicry-based, trust-based learning, where you're not so much listening to the person's words as mirroring them, mirroring their posture, mirroring their motion, and mirroring their demeanor. Now, if you were trained in a fear-based environment, very well, it means you can never reach flow that way until you kind of go back in and rewrite those parts of your brain. But that's a different discussion. But so your mirror neurons do this mimicry at this point. Hey, April, how are you? So a lot of the NLP stuff talks about this in more detail for the curious. But so at that point, when you identify with someone, then the mimicry, that dance, that synchrony becomes the reward system. And as such, you do this broadband accelerated learning through mimicry, this socio-emotional learning, where you're paying tight attention to the feedback, because the feedback is leading to you unfolding who you are through the identity which you are mimicking. And children do it amazingly. Children learn through what's called, they develop this thing called over imitation, where they learn the things their parents do in an exaggerated way. And another aspect is they're competent with it. It's competence without comprehension. Yeah, they have competence without comprehension, which means they're amazing at doing these things that they watch their parents do, but they don't really understand the logic behind it. And quite honestly, the parents often don't understand the logic behind it because they learned it through mimicry from up the string. Now, in a growth mindset, you're able to absorb all of that information through mimicry, through adopting someone's metaphor, listening to someone's narrative without a sense of identity threat every time you hit cognitive dissonance. In a fixed mindset, you're so busy defending the things that you don't understand and don't know, for fear of feeling as if you're being lowered in the tribe. And in the scarcity mindset, subconsciously, you're always imagining that when you're, what are they called? Norms of exclusion. When you violate certain norms of It might be norms of inclusion, but when you violate them in your imagination based off your mislearning of this social role, when you violate them, you feel as if you're being moved towards the outside of the tribe. Your immune system changes such that it prepares for bacteriological attack, as opposed to the immune system of someone who is moving inwards and feeling included in the tribe, all that oxytocin and whatever. That person is getting ready for a viral attack. So your body does all that. Your immune system does all that. And what you experience it as emotions, but really it's the system doing its job. It's your system managing energy, allocating it to the parts that need it at the time. Which is why your prefrontal cortex shuts down once your immune stuff crosses the blood-brain barrier. Hey, Sean, how are you? We're geeking out a good bit on this one, man. So I'm talking cortisol and stuff. But so in a growth mindset, you're basically learning the stuff at an accelerated rate because you're learning it subliminally. You trust, you're open, you're learning as you did as a child, you're curious. You're listening to the feedback because the feedback has high value to you. And I'm talking value in the neuroscience sense. Value in the neuroscience sense is it doesn't have to be reward. It's information that's dense, that fills in a specific hole in your schema. And that specific hole is in your conceptual map where an unmet need exists. It's something you need right now, and you feel as if you don't know yourself fully until you discover it. So that's basically curiosity-driven learning is, goal-directed behavior around your core needs. So what happens is when you identify with someone, what you see is a similarity with them in who you are, similarity in values, similarity in what you, through mimicking their intentions, which is what your mirror neurons do, they mimic intentions. Through mimicking their intentions based off the similarity you see and the amount of trust that you have that you're accurately projecting into their mind, you hold on one second, I'm messing with the buttons here, that happens. So by doing that, essentially, I'm still messing with the buttons. So you're projecting yourself to their mind to some accuracy. Okay. So in the growth mindset, when you do that, you're basically doing this download of all this information from not just the person, but the generations of narratives that person has downloaded into their mind. This is what's called connecting with the infinite, connecting with source, going into flow, going into the zone. Because at that point, you have access to these metaphors, and you can communicate with this person that has this depth of information. They've developed all that expertise that they have. And as a matter of fact, you don't even need to develop that expertise, because if you're communicating and connected with that person in an accelerated trust-based relationship, all you got to do is ask them to do something, and they're going to do it, because when you have that level of rapport, and you guys are future-proofing together and you're projecting the vision together, they can see what you can see, and they're moving through curiosity-based learning as well. So they're going with their expertise, and you're seeing the future through their eyes. Sorry, it's just a set of ideas that I've been exploring around this concept of identity, the concept of what you lose when you're not able to learn from mistakes. Because when your brain goes into defensive reactivity, and what happens is, this happens during stereotype threat. This is the studies where they saw that by reminding black kids they were black, their scores on standardized tests went down. By reminding women about women's performance in math, their scores went down in math. This didn't work with Asian women, though, which just tells you the power of stereotype threat. People fall into their stereotypes, into these identities, into those roles, if they have that fixed mindset. That fixed mindset makes you susceptible to that kind of priming. So the ability to learn from mistakes, which is the most important part of actually having an effective feedback loop, so that you can go into flow and relax and learn as you go, as well as so you can be effective with deliberate practice. I'm still pushing buttons. So it's all predicated on being able to accept, make mistakes, accept, and be present enough to learn from them without going into shame and blame mode, without shutting your system down. Now, I've done extensive, and this is the concept of play, the concept of fun. Dr. V, I see, yeah, I see you're in the conversation, so I know you know about the engagement stuff. This is the concept of true engagement. This is the concept of a person through their curiosity experiencing, well, just being connected with life and experiencing it as unfolding them based off their action, their timely action. You see the person and they're living it like a dance, they're playing it like a game. Dr. V, you're funny. So basically, this is the work play dichotomy where when people play, they're okay to make mistakes. You watch a kid play and they're like, oh, I died again. But meanwhile, when they're outside of the game universe, they're freezing up every time they're about to make a mistake because they know that in that context, the mistakes get reprimanded. It's been bound to that cultural conditioning. So again, that's the cultural conditioning that results in the fixed mindset, just to loop that concept back around. So the cortisol spikes, the results of basically just a conditioning where a parent, when a child was being raised, seeking reflection in the parents' reactions to them to identify who they were, they received, during feedback, they received criticism. They received, there's two types of feedback, and one is called descriptive feedback, where you explain to the child or even the person the situation and how it differs from the goal, the desired outcome. And then there's evaluative feedback, which is feedback in which you tell the person you're upset, you're ashamed, they're never going to be anything or whatever. That's less useful as far as actionable items, and it tends to trigger the defensive reactivity and the guilt. That's the guilt-based, shame-based conditioning that I mentioned earlier and in the writing. But so where was I headed with that? Essentially, that's the wall around your current consciousness. That's because fixed mindset is basically the edge of your imagination, the edge of your belief system is the edge of your ability to conceive as possible. Because there'll be dragons on the other side of that. Fear-based conditioning, reward pursuit, not so much focus on a mastery mindset, not much of an abundance mindset. So I think that covered just about everything I could think of around those concepts. Yeah, man. All right. Thanks y'all for geeking with me. Dr. Manny, I'm out.